So my name is Simeon Scheuber-Rush. I am a regional officer at the Musicians Union. And the Musicians Union is a trade union, and we're the only trade union for musicians in the UK. We've got 35,000 members that work across the music industry in a whole variety of different areas, across all genres and across different roles. So we have people who work in orchestras, we have people who are music teachers, we have people who are recording artists, music producers, session musicians, a real mix. So anyone that's working as a music writer, composer, songwriter, they're represented by us as well. And basically, we are a traditional trade union in many ways, in that, you know, we're there to, when people have issues with their work, particularly with their work as a musician, and when they're operating in their capacity as a musician, we're there to support them in a variety of different ways. So that could be through the campaigns that we do, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about campaigns later on. It could be through employment law support. So if they're in an employed position, perhaps in an orchestra or in the West End, or perhaps when they're working as a music teacher or an educator, it could be that they have a disciplinary issue or a redundancy issue or something like that, or a pay negotiation issue, and we would support them in that way in a traditional trade union sense. But also we give career advice. We offer legal advice for musicians. So if you receive like a publishing deal or a record deal or a contract relating to your work as a musician, we have music industry specialist lawyers who will give you legal advice on that before you sign it. As well as a whole host of general advice and other kind of things that we offer. There are some really practical things. I know this isn't a sales pitch, by the way, but just in terms of, you know, some of the benefits of being a member of the MU are things like musical instrument and equipment insurance, up to £3,000 is included in your membership. You also have public liability insurance, which is really important for when you're gigging in venues, because venues want to see your PLI certificate, as well as other things that are more niche and specific to certain parts of the industry, because we have such a broad membership of different types of musicians who work across different sectors.
Perfect. I kind of just so you dug into a lot of it there, but why does music need a union?
That's a good question. I think, like, I'm an advocate of trade unionism in general, right? And so, you know, we've seen industrial action on the railways recently, haven't we, with like RMT and other unions like that. And basically, it's about coming together when you've got issues and shared interests, and what you can achieve when you come together. And I think that's specifically important in the music industry, because people talk a lot about the gig economy, but the music industry is the original gig economy, where we're literally gigging from gig to gig, like earning a little bit of money. We're self-employed. 80% of musicians are self-employed, whereas 15% of the country is self-employed. So we're a really precarious workforce as musicians, and we're people that need that support of coming together, because there's so much more that you can achieve when you come together. So yeah, we're a democratic organisation, so we're run by the members. We're not run by people like me who are employees, although I have been a member of the union for a long time as well as a musician. And it's about the members deciding democratically, what should we do? Is that enough pay if you're playing in an orchestra at the BBC? Is that enough? Are those conditions okay if you're working in a theatre pit in the West End? You know, actually, should you have more breaks? Is the size of the room you're in okay? Is there a health and safety issue? Do you need some hearing protection? That sort of stuff. Some really practical things like that. It could be any manner of those things. And I think when it comes to like recording artists and stuff like that, particularly like when we think about a lot of the people that are maybe listening to this podcast, I've got to think about like that, pooling the money together. So you pay your membership fee. And actually, it might be that you can't really afford a music lawyer on your own, but then together, when collectively all those fees are brought in together, we can afford to spend that money on your behalf when you need it. So it's on that kind of like, it's sort of like almost like an NHS sort of model, and that everyone pays in, and then when you need it, you kind of get the service that you need or the support that you need. But yeah, fundamentally, it's a democratic organisation, and it's run by the members. And from our founding 131 years ago now, it's always been about musicians deciding to get together about issues that are impacting them.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there's, as you said, obviously music is the original gig economy. It's going from job to job. There's often, I feel like as well, with music, there's a lot of work where musicians aren't sort of the priority, and it's often like, I don't know, for example, like bands or like cruise ships that need like musicians in the background and stuff like that. And I think often in those kind of scenarios, it can be pay the musicians and forget about it. And those kind of small nitty gritty issues that make a big difference, like as you said, hearing protection, things like that, it's great to have some kind of collective sort of power in that, where people can sort of stand up together and sort of make those issues known, because often on an individual basis, and often as well, in a lot of cases, people who hire musicians don't come from music in a lot of those kind of scenarios, and don't maybe know about, whereas like maybe at somewhere like here, like Rough Trade, it's sort of the people around it, sort of around music, know about these issues. People, sort of a director on a cruise ship might have no idea that is even a problem. So it's a really good way of sort of, as you said, having that sort of collective voice.
Absolutely, I think that's really true, and I think we talk about all the problems that musicians know and understand, but also sometimes it's like it's about learning from each other as a collective of musicians. And I think, like, one of our longest running campaigns is about like work not play, right? Because there's that kind of view, isn't there, outside of the music world, that there's this romanticized view of these starving artists who do it for exposure or love or whatever, and actually, like, they've got to earn a living. And so there's a lot of people still. We still see stuff. We get sent stuff all the time where, there might be, like, for example, a charity event where they're putting on a big charity dinner and they want the musicians to play for free. And they're going to pay the chefs and they're going to pay all the catering staff and they're going to pay for all the food. But the musicians, as you said earlier, like, they're the last people to be thought about sometimes. But they're probably the thing that people remember the most when they come away from a charity event is like, oh, what was that awesome band playing in the corner, or what was going on stage? So I think we might be guilty as a society of undervaluing musicians and the role that musicians can play. And the same, I think, from a kind of political level, and like this country, I'm not going to get too political, but this country doesn't like manufacture that much stuff anymore, right? But one thing that we do really well in this country, amongst finance and maybe higher education or whatever, is like the creative industries, and we punch above our weight internationally as a country when it comes to like the music industry, film industry, creative arts, that sort of stuff. And so I think it's really important that we recognise that actually this is something that governments should be investing in. The arts, music education and arts education is something that needs investing in and nurturing that whole kind of industry, so that we can continue to build on the successes that I think we already have in the UK and the music economy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting you said about the chefs and stuff. I think it's interesting that, like, maybe part of the problem is that music and musicians don't deliver a manufactured product, a physical service. They deliver something that sort of, which is harder to sort of value. Like, what is the value of hearing? What's the value of hearing a song that brings you to tears? Like, you can't sort of place monetary value on the impact that music can have, which is both an amazing thing and can be a thing that makes musicians get undervalued.
Totally, and I mean, and that it's quite interesting because I've been listening to your podcast for a while, and I know you've had guests on, like Nina Himmelreich, who's been talking about universal basic income and things like that for artists and for musicians, and that is something that actually is MU policy. That's something that our members democratically decided that we should back and campaign on. And so one of our campaigns is about UBI, a universal basic income, and it's that idea that actually, like, the world would be a much nicer place. When a lot of jobs might get automated and taken out of, as technology develops and as AI potentially, makes some jobs obsolete and things like that. The thing that's left is like creativity, and that creativity is something that people enjoy. It's what makes you cry. It's what makes you get up in the morning. It's like, people remember, big significant events in their lives by like, what do I want to play me down the aisle at my wedding, or like, what do I want at my funeral, or like, how do I want people to remember me when my coffin goes through the room or whatever. There's like all these kind of ways, and we mark a lot of events with music, and so I think we could be guilty of like undervaluing the importance of music, and I mean that monetarily as well, but not in this kind of like capitalist like way, but I mean actually, like, artists, if we want to support music and we want to support artists and we want to have a vibrant music economy like we already do, but really we've got so much more potential, especially in Liverpool as well, is like we need to fund it, we need to value it.
Yeah, let's get on to that actually. UBI, I think that's a good place to start. For anyone who doesn't know, what is universal basic income? So
universal basic income is an idea, a concept. It's not just in the music industry that this idea's come around. It's been around in like left-wing politics for a long time. But the idea of like, actually, what if we just have the fundamental benefits of a bit of money that supports people, a little bit like maybe a pension for everyone, or like the fact that we do have universal healthcare. It's like a universal bit of money that's just there, like as a kind of a sustainer. And the union support of UBI really came out of the pandemic, because the pandemic shifted everything. The Musicians Union spent a long time taking calls from people who are like, I'm going to have to switch careers, I'm going to have to change, we're going to have to do something else, because venues closed down. And I remember when, one of the greatest memories of like music in Liverpool was that test event live gig in Sefton Park. I remember that with like Zuzu and the Lathams, and it was amazing. And like, it was just like, wow, it's back, but that whole dark period, we had like members who were falling through the cracks of all of the government support because, as you say, musicians or self-employed people are often like the last on the list to get any support. And that's where the swell of support within the union came for universal basic income, to say, actually, do you know what? Rather than like having to absolutely like graft a variety of different jobs just so that you have the opportunity to pick up your cello like a little bit later in the day, so actually, why don't we just support you, and then you can just do the art, do the music, create stuff, give you a little bit of basic income, not a full income, but a basic income that just supports your existence, your basic needs.
Yeah, and it's something that's being trialled in a variety of areas. Like I know in New York they're doing it with first-time mothers. I think in Ireland they're actually doing it with sort of creative people and musicians and stuff. And I think one of the sort of myths that I've seen around it a lot of the time, I think, is that obviously it's going to cost a fortune. Whereas I think one of the things that people don't know is that on a lot of the research that's been done on UBI is that, I'm trying to find a way to phrase it, but that the cost of having a system that decides who gets benefits and who doesn't get benefits is so great in terms of the factors of having to decide and having to have people working on who that is, that if you take a lot of that infrastructure out, you actually have a lot of money left over to just give it to people in a blanket way.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of research, as you say. It's like means testing, isn't it? So like means testing all kinds of different benefits. Sometimes it's so expensive to do that it is just cheaper to give it to everyone. And it is a little bit like that NHS thing. You could say like, well, you're wealthy enough that you don't need to go to the doctor for free, so we're going to charge you a bit more. But the cost of administering all that, when you could just provide a really good universal service for everyone, is an interesting debate to have, and whether that is going to be more expensive. And I think the research suggests that means testing is more expensive often than providing the benefit and getting the outcomes you need. A lot of our members are portfolio career musicians, so they'll have their fingers in multiple pies, and some of them therefore didn't reach the threshold to kind of the means tested threshold, as we're just talking about, to get any sort of like self-employment income support scheme from the government, because they kind of earned too much money from their employed work, because they might have been maybe like, I don't know, a saxophone teacher at a school for like 4 hours a week or something, and then also they're like gigging at the weekend, but when they're at the school maybe they're employed, when they're outside of the school they're kind of self-employed, and that kind of meant they just fell through the cracks. They didn't get any support, but all of their work stopped, right?
Yeah.
And that's just like absolutely critical and fundamental. So I saw a lot of friends who would go from going from like touring with a musical around the country or around Europe to like the next day they were like at doing pizza deliveries or something like that, and they had to do a complete U-turn and a complete 180. And many of them thought that they'd never be able to come back to music. And I've seen some people who have completely changed careers and they've not gone back to music because they feel so precarious. And so that's why things like trade unions are really important. When you've got someone there, if you've got like a late payment of a gig fee or something like that, that's like my bread and butter of my work is chasing money for musicians, because they're like often the last people to get paid for a lot of reasons. And yeah, it's important to have someone there that's going to support you. That's going to, we've got in-house solicitors and lawyers that are going to support you if you have to go to court to kind of chase up unpaid fees and things like that.
Yeah.
And so, that's what's really important about having that collective voice, but also those universal benefits, those safety nets, like universal basic income, just makes sense for like a career that could be so precarious and uncertain as the music industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm literally going to quote Nina here pretty much directly, but I remember when we were talking about this and she was saying that like, the problem is that a lot of people with universal basic income is that so many people who sort of create art work full time and work a job that they hate, and then that drains the energy that you have to go home and do what is work. Like obviously some of the sort of creative side is often what us musicians sort of just do as a hobby, but like the work of like, okay, I've got to record this, okay, I've got to pay to record this in some cases, okay, I've got to sort of send out some press releases for my single and that kind of stuff can be so like, if you work full time and you have that added job on the side, can be so draining that idea of having a safety net where you can afford to get by whilst building something. And I think that would apply for outside of musicians themselves, for like creative businesses and stuff like that, where like people would have the opportunity to take a few months and build something themselves, as opposed to having to build something a lot slower alongside having to balance a job and that kind of stuff.
Totally. And I think fundamentally musicians are underpaid, in general. And I think, like, you know, look at the statistics on this, and I think, you know, the average income for those making 100% of their income from music, just reading my notes here, is around £30,000. That compares to an average median income in the UK of £33,000. But the average salary for a working age person with a degree is £38,500. So they're about 8.5 grand on average underpaid musicians who work as musicians full time. So no wonder there's like some musicians who are moonlighting as other things, working in other shops or doing other things, you know, to support their income, because fundamentally I don't think people value musicians and music enough. And so that's why we're here as an organisation, to campaign and to organise and to lobby government and organisations and industry to make sure that musicians get paid fairly for the work that they do.
I think another, moving on from UBI, another way where musicians generally don't get paid fairly, I was talking about this earlier actually, is the action that you guys are organising against buyouts. And I think that's a really interesting one. Do you want to just explain like what that sort of concept is in terms of like buyouts? Yeah,
so we have a joint campaign with the Ivors Academy. I don't know if you know the Ivors, but the Ivors represent songwriters and composers, and they're like a professional trade body for people to sign up to. They also do the Ivor Novello Awards or the Ivor Awards, which are obviously very prestigious awards in the creative side of music. And our joint campaign is called Fair Score. And it's about media composers, and fundamentally we're campaigning against the use of buyouts. And buyouts are quite common in other countries sometimes, particularly the USA. I think buyouts are quite common there. But in the UK, the standard business practice has always been that you get an upfront fee for your work, for the time that you've done to compose the work, and then there should be some royalties that come afterwards that, you know, further support you as you continue working. And we're seeing an increasing number of musicians in the UK being asked to work for a buyout where they don't get the royalties afterwards. And so that's something that we're trying to we created a manifesto on fair commissioning that we want organisations to sign up to. So big organisations are already doing the right thing, but we're trying to get more and more people to stop moving to that model where there is that sort of unfair buyout process. We're seeing some really bad practices coming down the line, and we've seen some, I'm not going to name any organisations at risk of doing anything dodgy, but there's, in other countries there's been big organisations that are looking for media composers that are looking to like completely buy out, but also completely devoid them of getting any royalties, not allowing them to be members of PROs like PRS and stuff like that as a condition of their of signing the contract. And I've seen that contract several times because members have come to me and said, have a look at this contract. So it's like, well, actually, this contract says you can't even be a member of PRS, which is just absolutely wild, to be honest.
Yeah, and I know we sort of talked about this already, but this is why that collective voice of a union is so important, because especially in music, I think, because those kind of opportunities can be so competitive that there will be, and I'm not blaming anyone here, but there will be musicians who are trying to get into that kind of industry who are willing to take deals that they sometimes in case they know aren't fair because they need that first opportunity.
And that's something we see across the music industry, and that's about, as I say, I think we're at risk of a country of undervaluing music, but I think we also might undervalue ourselves as musicians and what we're really worth. And so I think it's really important that we don't, it's not a race to the bottom of like, do you know what? I can undercut someone else and I'll get the gig, that sort of idea. And so that's why we have, one of the big things we do as a union is we set like recommended minimum rates. So we have like promulgated rates, but then we also have collective agreements with certain organisations. So we have collective agreement with the BBC, collective agreement with Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra. So everyone who plays in the orchestra gets a minimum that they're guaranteed as their salary. And then if they do additional work on top, we have, the terms and conditions are negotiated by our members with the MU and the Liverpool Philharmonic, and so we have these collective agreements are really important. So that's the kind of the benefit of it. But yeah, we totally see that. I mean, like, I'm going to go back to the start of MU history here now, but Joseph B. Williams, who was the first General Secretary of the Musicians Union 131 years ago, the reason I'm going to quote him now is because this quote's amazing. When he set up the MU, or when he was the first General Secretary, he said, the MU is here to protect us from amateurs, protect us from unscrupulous employers, and protect us from ourselves. And I think that's like so important because, there are employers out there who can be really damaging. There are amateurs who might, that's not to say we should ban karaoke bars or anything like that. What I mean is like by amateurs is like actually we can amateurize ourselves by saying, do you know what? I'll do that gig for exposure, or I'll do that gig because it's a great opportunity, even though you're not going to get paid for it. but then also protecting us from ourselves, because we can be guilty of that sort of thing of like not valuing ourselves properly, and fundamentally like we're undermining the collective like landscape of the music industry. So I think that quote's great. I mean, it's like it's still relevant today as it was 131 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's how that first part of protect from amateurs. Obviously, everyone at some stage is an amateur, and it's I wouldn't want to sort of come on and sort of be like, I don't want to be like against those people who take those opportunities, because I do get that in this industry there are times where you do sort of need to offer yourself like for cheaper work and stuff like that. Totally, and it in a lot of cases unfortunately is necessary, but I think once you reach that sort of professional stage and sort of are making it as a career, it's a real sort of slippery slope to go down to undervalue yourself and to in the wider music context.
It's something that I speak about a lot with musicians. It's like, because as musicians, we suffer a lot from like imposter syndrome, and it's kind of that idea of like, where is the line between amateur and professional, right? Like, when do you become a professional musician? Is it when you put it in your Twitter bio? Like, is it when you like get paid for your first gig, or is it when you're doing like a stadium tour, like Taylor Swift size, right? What is success and what is professional, and like where is amateur? And it's a blurred line, but I think it's like it's more about like the mindset, right? It's kind of like dress for the job you want to get, you know. It's kind of like it's like, actually, I want to be doing these kind of gigs, and so therefore I actually need to move into that direction. I need to have the audacity to say, and sometimes it does feel audacious, but having the audacity to say, actually, do you know what? The minimum rate for the MU for this type of gig is 150 quid, and so I'm gonna quote minimum 150 quid or potentially higher, and that sort of thing. And like that's a really bold move, isn't it? But that's you saying, do you know what? I'm a professional musician, and this is me doing it. But I get it, it's hard. I've done, you know, I hope I don't lose my job. I've done gigs for below MU rates before, you know, back in the past, right? And that is something that, as you know, I've been fully aware of the implications of it. It's not something I'm particularly like proud of, but it's something that I understand happens, and we all understand happens, because like we're musicians and we have to exist, and sometimes, you know, we've got to live, we've got to eat, and sometimes the you know, the well-paid gigs might just be around the corner, and you've got to take a few of the kind of like not as well-paid gigs on the road, as you say, from like as you transition towards that kind of like more sustainable career in the performing arts. But it's tough out there. It's tough out there to be a musician. But like, there's so much great stuff, particularly in Liverpool, going on in the music industry. There's a vibrant, you know, we're a UNESCO music city, and there's so much going on here that, you know, there's so much potential. And, you know, all the previous podcasts that we've already mentioned, you know, with like Nina and Connor and what they're trying to build, and like all the people in Liverpool that are doing great things, the podcast itself as well, we're trying to build this like community. I think it's so important for like supporting each other, and it's that idea of like collectivism, of like a union, of like coming together. I think is like so important for music. Yeah, definitely.
Talk to me a little bit more about some of those, because you mentioned like the minimum pay and that rates that you have on the website. Talk to me a bit more about some of those like resources that you have available.
Yeah, totally. So the MU we're a membership organisation, but not that much stuff is behind a paywall. I've got to be honest. There is loads of great resources on the website that are there, that I just recommend to all musicians, particularly like, you know, we go and speak to music students like LIPA and other like music colleges, and we're always telling them about the resources on the website that are just there to like give you guidance. So we have like a specimen record deal on the website you can download. It's like, here's what should be in a record deal. Here's what these terms mean in plain English. And here's the sorts of like, you know, obviously everything's negotiable, but these are the sorts of things you should expect in a fair record deal, which is like really useful. So we have like specimen publishing deals, record deals, management deals, all that sort of stuff that are made in alignment with lawyers. We make them with industry partners. So our management deal is like made with MMF, you know, like the Music Managers Forum, who are the trade body that represent music managers. And so, you know, it's not like we're fighting them. We're like working with them to like be like, yeah, actually, what would a fair management deal look like? And that sort of stuff. We also have like really good template contracts on the website. Like one of the most basic ones that I think Grace mentioned this maybe in the podcast review is like the song share agreement we have, right? There's nothing more important than when you're like writing a song with a friend or a collaborator. There's nothing more important than writing down how much you think you should each get as a split of that song. And the song share agreement is a way of codifying it in a contract, signing it at the end. It's free to download on the website. Just go and use it. You don't need to be a member to use it.
Yeah, I've said this earlier today, but we were talking about about those kind of things, about those kind of like songwriter agreements, and just the idea that a lot of musicians don't really bother with it. They want to get a contract out with a friend, but just that this idea that money has broken up much better friendships than yours.
Totally.
And so do not like overlook the fact that if you're going to release a song, or if you're going to do anything with a song beyond the room that you write it in, have something in paper. And I think in some cases as well, if it doesn't need to necessarily be a full contract, if you're going to play it at a gig that night, you can just scribble something down. But those kind of agreements and those kind of resources are really important.
Totally. I think like it's about picking your battles and choosing the hill you're going to die on, right? That's like my life motto, I think, in general. But it's important, I think, for all of us that, you know, are working in like advocacy for musicians, but all of us that are musicians as well and advocating for ourselves. And I think that that's really important. You know, you could argue for hours on end about like 10% versus 11% of a song that might never ever get any streams and might never ever get listened to by anyone and might not ever get recorded, right? But actually just having like a sort of a sit down, like, you know, cordial conversation about, do you know what? Yeah, I reckon your contribution is 20%. Let's codify that. Are you happy with that? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my number one tip in life in general, I'd say, is get it in writing for any musician about everything. You know, there's so many things that you like have a chat at the bar about something and you understand it one way and someone might understand it differently, or you might get a phone call about a gig, about what, you know, what fee you're going to get. Just follow it up and get an email that just says, here's the fee for the gig, here's what you're getting paid, here's when you're going to turn up, and all that sort of stuff. Really important.
I think that can especially be true with gigs, because so many gigs with local promoters are so casually done, and sometimes that's a great thing. It's like really informal. You don't have to be sort of sending admin back and forth. But then I've done gigs before where we've never been paid for them, because I remember a gig that we did where they said, "Oh, we'll do it with how many tickets you sell," and we knew something was up immediately based on the fact that they weren't counting how many tickets each of the bands had sold. So we counted them up. I think we told like 15, and I think it was going to be like £2-3 tickets. So we weren't emailing to ask for a fortune. No. But yeah, those emails bounced back, and they sent us other emails which bounced back, and yes, that did not end particularly well for the promoter, thankfully. But
no.
But yeah, it's interesting. Those kind of really, there's so many of those like very casual agreements in the music industry. So that's a really interesting perspective to like, that it's that important to get it into writing when you can.
Definitely, and you've just triggered another resource memory of what's on the website. But we have our live music department have developed a fair play venue scheme and a fair play guide, which is about like when you're self-promoting a gig, when you're doing your own promotion, what's a fair deal and how to negotiate those sorts of things and things to look out for. You know, because we all know about pay to play and all these sorts of like different things that go on in the music industry, particularly in the live industry. And so we've got a guide on that, and we also have a bunch of venues that have signed up to the Fair Play venue scheme, and they're listed on our website. So they're venues that have signed up to not be unscrupulous in the way that they deal with musicians. So, for example, I know we were talking about Future Yard, but Future Yard are a Fair Play venue over in Birkenhead, over the water. Great venue, doing really cool stuff, but also treating their musicians fairly when it comes to ticketing deals and things like that.
Definitely. Let's move on to another one of your campaigns I really want to touch on, is your campaign to fix streaming, which is a big title, I've got to say. Fix streaming. So do you want to just like...
Easily done in 1 minute. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. why are just first of all, why are the MU campaigning about fixing streaming?
Well, I think it's come up on the podcast before, actually, with other guests. I think Yao was talking about it, about like how much people get from streaming, whether it be songwriters, recording artists, session musicians, and fundamentally, like it's broken and it's skewed in the favor of record labels and other kind of industry bigwigs, if you like. And so, what the Fix Streaming campaign is about, and fundamentally what the union is about, right? It's about two things. The union is about like protecting, like it's about being like small c conservative and like protecting musicians' rights and what they've got. But it's also about like imagining like a better music industry is possible and is out there. And it's like, actually, okay, yeah, we've got what we've got currently with streaming, but like if we were to redo streaming, like not just like scrambling around after like digital downloads and all that sort of stuff, like if we were to rethink streaming and make it more fair, then what would we do? And so our General Secretary, Naomi Pohl, she's been with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee on this. We've been campaigning government on this, and there is a new kind of industry body that's been created, not an industry body yet, a working group of industry bodies, including the MU, and we're there to represent the musicians, the songwriters, the composers, and the session musicians, about a fairer deal, and that includes everything from like making sure songwriters get more than, you know, their on average 200 quid they might get from Spotify streams or whatever, to like equitable remuneration for session musicians. So I mean, I don't know if you know, equitable remuneration, or ER, is like a royalty that comes from PPL for people whose performances are captured in a record, right? So
right.
I'm a bit of a average trombonist, right? And I've played a couple of trombone notes in some like pop tune, and I get, you know, about 28p of royalties for that couple of notes that I put in a pop tune every time it's played on like Radio 2 or something like that. But I get nothing from streaming at all. So as a session trombone player, I'll get something anytime something's played on radio. I'll get that equitable remuneration payment, but there's currently no equitable remuneration at all for streaming for any session musician captured in the recording. Only the people that own the recording rights holders, and the people that composition or the musical work, the song that is kind of exploited by the recording, they get a small royalty, but not enough. And session musicians get nothing. So there's quite a few things that we want to fix with streaming. And so again, that's about our members democratically saying, this is what it should be like, and us advocating on their behalf, whether it's lobbying government or the industry or whatever. So it's a really important campaign, and you know, you can find out more about it on our website, and we encourage you to join it and to sign up to it and support petitions and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great as well, because I think it's very easy to say streaming should pay more as like a very general sort of principle line that I think most people would probably agree with. But I think it's great that you sort of have these specific points that are then very lobbyable. That's not a word, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they're very easy to sort of make a common sense argument that, look, if we can't get them to just pay more right now, these are the practical things that need to change in terms of making this better for everyone.
Because I think like people like to pretend that there's like no money in the music industry, but like that's not true, is it? Like, there's a lot of money, but like, is it getting to the right people? I think it is what it's about. Because I think, like, you know, when digital downloads started, and then we had sort of like pirating of music, there was a lot of panic, a bit of a real and a bit of a moral panic about like, the digital age, no one's buying physical anymore. Ironically, we're sitting above a record store that's doing very well, but that's another conversation. But yeah, people weren't buying physical CDs, people weren't paying for, you know, iTunes downloads and things, and we moved to streaming, and it's kind of changed the whole consumption model. But there's still money, right? There's still money in the music industry. Yeah. There's still people making money from music, from streams. And so I think it's just about making sure that there's a fairer split for that. And also recognizing that, you know, there's still a yearning for music. You know, we're in a live music venue now, you know, whilst it's quiet, and doing this podcast here. But, you know, there is a real yearning for live music, I think. And there's a real audience and appetite for it. So, and that's what people have had to do, you know, whilst they're not making enough money from streaming, they've had to go and tour more and play live more and do that sort of stuff, because you can earn money from that. And so, yeah, I think, you know, it's really important to be aware of the whole kind of like ecosystem that it exists within might not just be as fair as it should be. Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, like what does, I guess the big question is what do you think a fair streaming economy looks like as an overall picture? I know it's a huge question.
That's a huge question. What does a fair streaming economy look like? I think it's one that you are. It's a really difficult question to answer. I don't know if we're going to get to the bottom of it in this podcast, but I think
that's fine.
No, but I think like it's something that fundamentally recognizes who creates the work, right, rather than who rather than the people that are like the enzymes that make the work like kind of happen or get put out there, like the gatekeepers, if you like.
The original value as opposed to the added value.
It's like, the original value, like, you know, those people that have put that work in, but also recognizing really like the amount of work that went in to get to that point, you know, the amount of hours of maybe music lessons or time with music teachers or instrumental upkeep of buying things, or recording studio time or DIY time where you've, you know, paid for loads of gear to do it yourself, and then for the majority of the money to go elsewhere and not to go to you, you know, isn't fair fundamentally. So I guess, yeah. What does fair look like? I can't answer it simply, but I think it's like it's not fair now, and it needs to change.
Yeah, no, good answer. It's an impossible question. I thought I'd put you on the spot a little bit, but
no, it's good. It's good. I like a challenge.
So like, we talked about it a little bit before, but like, what's a few more of the things outside of like campaigns and like some of the resources that Musicians Union sort of do for musicians?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we put on like a lot of events. So we put on like panel discussions. We put on networking events. We put on educational events. So members can upskill and learn a lot more and meet other musicians and do stuff like that. We also do a lot in the health and wellbeing space with I think we're the union in the UK with the largest sort of health and wellbeing resources out of all trade unions in terms of what we offer to our members. So, we offer moulded hearing protection at a heavily reduced price. I think it's about £17.50, which should be about £210. And that's in association with Help Musicians, who are a great charity that we're partnered with. And I know you probably know a lot about them because you've spoken about funding and stuff before. But yeah, we also offer careers advice. We also, as I say, we kind of negotiate pay collectively. We have promulgated rates of pay. And we help with legal advice, assistance, and stuff like that. And generally, we're just available at the end of the phone just to talk to people. And being in the music industry is tough. Sometimes it's good to just talk to someone that gets it and understands and can point you in the direction of the next step to get to like where you need to be. And so that's what we're there for. There's no like stupid questions. I ask questions all the time because the music industry is complicated, right? Like royalties are complicated. Everything's complicated. And so people will come to us with questions, and quite often I'm like, do you know what? I'm just going to go and ask one of my colleagues in a specialist department who's, in the recording and broadcasting team who are just an expert on this because I just don't know. But, it's about like knowing that there's somewhere to come to where you can ask and there's the expertise within the organisation. And we're on the side of musicians, like our strapline is like behind every musician. And fundamentally, we don't have corporate sponsors. We are completely democratic, we're completely run by the members, and that's really important. And we've got like a long legacy and history of that over our 130 years. I'm sitting here wearing a very on-brand Keep Music Live t-shirt. Keep Music Live is probably one of our longest running campaigns. This logo is quite iconic. Like most musicians have like seen one of these stickers at some point because they're like on guitar cases and cello cases and stuff like that across the country. And I remember them, like my trombone teacher back in the day used to have one on his trombone case, and it's like such an iconic design. But it's like such a live issue for us because we most recent example of this is Northern Ballet, right? So Northern Ballet just this summer have switched from a live orchestra to using a track, and it's like we need to keep music live. Like if you're going to go to the ballet, right, which is quite like an expensive, quite like really kind of cool cultural activity to do, Northern Ballet in September, unless things change, and we're campaigning obviously to change that, unless things change, you'll see live dancing, but you won't hear live music. And that's such a shame. So like keeping music live is something that's really important. And we've got some really long running campaigns and things that we do, that the members want us to do because the members are in charge of the union, it's their union.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. I'm just gonna to wrap up. Obviously, talking about the members and it's their union. Who should join the musicians union? Who is it? Obviously, musicians is going to be the obvious answer. But like, who? Yeah, what? Yeah, who should join the musicians union?
No, that's a good question. So the short answer is musicians. Yeah, but I guess it's like, what is a musician, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Because people have like misconceptions about the MU, and I think that's fair enough because we do such a diverse range of stuff, right? As an organisation, people are like, oh, you're just for the music teachers, or oh, you're just for the classical musicians, or oh, you're just for songwriters, but you're not for composers, and we get all of these kind of like things where like misunderstandings about what the MU is there for. We are for anyone who's acting in their capacity as a musician. So that's anyone that is writing music, anyone that's performing music, anyone that's recording music, people who are producing music as well to an extent. That's people who are singers, instrumentalists, working across any genre of music, rappers, whatever kind of thing you do in music. We're there to support you, and we can support you when you're acting in your capacity as a musician. So what we're not for, if that's still like maybe, is like we're not for like industry people. So I guess if you work for a record label, there are different unions that might be more appropriate for you. And fundamentally, my fundamental message would be join a union, right? So regardless of what kind of work you do, there will be a union that's relevant to the work that you do, that can support you when you have an issue, that can give you legal help if you need it. And so fundamentally, join a union is what I'd say. But if you're a musician, join the musicians union.